formula practice number 2. I'll do number 1, 2, and 5 again. So remember, when you start the quadratic formula, you want to make sure that the quadratic is set equal to 0, which is what we have here. So the next thing you need to do is decide what your values for A, B, and C are. A is the first coefficient, which is 1 here. B is -5, and C is -14. We're going to put those into our quadratic formula. Now it starts with the opposite of B. Now the opposite of -5 is +5, plus or minus a giant square root. Under the square root, you do the B, which is -5, always put it in parentheses, squared, minus 4 times A times -14, which is C, all over 2 times A. Now when I simplify this, remember, just like the last practice, you don't put the radical into decimals or your calculator. You're only simplifying what is underneath the radical here. And that's going to go underneath the radical in the next step. So let's put this in to decimals. Excuse me. You're going to start with parentheses, -5 squared minus 4 times A is 1 times -14. You should get the value of 81 when you do this on your own. So we're going to put 81 under the radical down here. We should recognize that 81 is a perfect square. So you can simplify 81 to be 9. So you really have 5 plus or minus 9 over 2. Now the thing to remember is that when you do not have a radical or you don't have I, you need to simplify this answer into 2 rational numbers. So you're going to take that fraction and split it up. You're going to write 1 with a plus, 5 plus 9 over 2, and 1 with a minus, 5 minus 9 over 2. And then you simplify. Well, this becomes 14 over 2, which is 7, and 5 minus 9 is -4 over 2, which is -2. So your actual answers, the solutions here, or x-intercepts, are 7 and -2. And yes, you could factor this quadratic because those are rational values. All right, number 2. I start by making sure this is set equal to 0. To do that, I need to add 10 to both sides. So I'm left with 2x squared minus 7x. -13 plus 10 is -3. Now next, I want you to label A, B, and C. A is 2. B is -7, C is -3. I'm going to put this into the quadratic formula. B is -7 here, so the opposite of -7 is +7. When I put -7 in here to square, it must be in parentheses. -4 times 2 times -3, all over 2 times A, 2 times 2. Now to simplify this, 7 plus or minus. I take what's under the radical, and I'm going to put it into the calculator. So I'll have, parentheses, -7 squared minus 4. Now here A is 2, and C is -3. That gives me 73 under my radical, which I can then fill in here. All over 2 times 2 is 4. Now 73, if you're trying to break down radical 73, there's actually not a perfect square that goes into 73. That cannot be simplified. So that's actually your final answer. 7 plus or minus radical 73 over 4. That's an irrational, those are irrational numbers, so it is not factorable. All right, one more here. All right, we're going to set equal to 0. So we start by labeling A, B, and C. A is -5, B is 12, C is -8. In my formula, I do the opposite of B. So -12 this time, plus or minus. B goes in parentheses, squared, minus 4. A is -5, C is negative 8. And the whole thing goes over 2 times A. All right, now I want you to take Desmos here, and we'll figure out what goes in the radical. I'm just writing the rest of it. Negative 12 plus or minus radical something. So we're going to take Desmos, and we're going to do 12 squared. Oops, I wrote that wrong. Minus 4. Now A here is negative 5. And C is negative 8. Which that gives me negative 16. So when I go back here, I'll have negative 12 plus or minus the square root of negative 16 over negative 10. Well, let me put that in a different color here. I need to now break that down. The square root of negative 16. Well, just like the last practice, when there's a negative, I break that down into the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 16. 16 is a perfect square. That's 4. And the square root of negative 1 is I. So we're going to replace the square root of negative 16 with 4i. So negative 12 plus or minus 4i over negative 10. And remember, that's the same thing. Everything in green. Last thing here is I noticed negative 12, 4, and 10 are all divisible by 2. So I'm going to divide a 2 out of each number. That gives me negative 6 plus or minus 2i divided by negative 5. Those numbers are just divided by 2. There's an I, so this is not factorable. All right, again, if you need extra help on this, check the key on Canvas or ask your teacher.